Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and I am knitting. Not right now, but most of the time. Today I figured I would make a quick video and show you how to iron. Just kidding, that is not at all what this video is about. I am going to show you something else. So, long story short, knitting is my most prized enjoyment. Anytime that I can knit, I will knit because I love it. Now, I am not the only person in my family who enjoys knitting. My two sisters both knit. My younger sister has been knitting for just about as long as I have. My older sister has picked it up over the course of the last year or so. And my mother is our most recent addition to the club, and she is knitting like a fiend. She started knitting in January. I taught her just like the most basic rudimentary lesson, like 20 minutes of my time when I was visiting home in January. Hi, Mom. And since then, she's just taken off. So right now she's working on a sampler shawl. Anyway, the point is, I'm going to make a series of videos to show her and maybe others, if you're at the same stage of beginning your knitting journey, about some important tips and tricks and maybe some like basic good things to know. So today, not going to show you how to iron because, in fact, I don't think I'm even good at ironing. So why would you trust me to show you anything about it? Rather, I'm going to show you how to use a yarn swift, and I figured this would function as my table to put it on because it's the only thing that I have, I think, that will be high enough for the camera to see and that is thin enough to have the yarn swift clamp onto it. So anyway, without further ado, this is how to use a yarn swift. So earlier I said that I knit, my sisters knit, and my mom knits, and I was a total failure of being a good aunt to tell you my nephew knits, and my niece is learning to knit also. So it's not just me, my sisters, and my mom, it's also the next generation. We are keeping it alive. I think even now it's just maybe not even tall enough, so I think I'll lower the camera and that will solve my problem. Okay, I've got the ironing board set up and I have one of my yarn swifts. I'll show you with my other option as well in a little bit, and then I have my yarn winder, and I'll go over all these in a minute. But before I do that, let's talk about why you would want to use a yarn swift in the first place. So let's just use this skein of Rory from Treehouse Knits as an example. This skein, when it's twisted like this, it kind of looks like one of those twist donuts. This is called a hank. So a skein is kind of the umbrella term, and a skein can come in various different forms. You could have a ball, a cone, or a hank. And typically, if you are buying wool, particularly hand-dyed wool, more often than not, or at least very commonly, that wool will be coming to you in hank form. If you tried to just knit or crochet with this hank, basically it's one big loop that's twisted up. If you tried to start knitting from this immediately, you would very soon be overwhelmed by a tangled mess, and it would be honestly a disaster. So we don't want to do that. Instead, you are going to wind this into a cake. So I'll show you how to do that here in a second. I am just going to keep this in its loop form, and I'm just going to rest it on my shoulder so it's safe and not going to be tangled. When you do this at home, you don't have to untwist it like I just did. I just did that to show you the construction of it. But you're going to take your yarn swift. This type of yarn swift is called an umbrella yarn swift. And I will tell you, I will link this one in the video description, but this one sucks. Like, I mean, it doesn't suck. I've had it for a long time, several years. I'll have to look at my Amazon purchase history. I'll add this in like some text, how long I've had this Swift, but a ridiculous amount of time, and I should have upgraded by now. When I say this sucks, I mean it just is annoying. Like these are all made of plastic, so they're kind of flimsy and sometimes the yarn gets tangled in them. But the fact that I've had it for several years is maybe a testament to the fact that it doesn't suck. But with this umbrella Swift, the idea basically is there's a spring right here, kind of just like with an umbrella you would use to protect yourself from rain. You slide it up and then it expands. And the degree of how high you slide that piece up in the middle here is going to directly correlate to how wide of a circumference you're opening the Swift into. Now, this is nice because the circumference of your skeins may vary based on weight. So this DK skein, I'll demonstrate that for you in a minute. So at the bottom here, we have a piece of the umbrella Swift that is adjustable. So you can spin that washer and then adjust the height of the clamp. Again, this is just a cheap yarn Swift. If you're just getting started, or maybe if you want to travel yarn Swift, this one might be a good option, but it really is just kind of the bare minimum of yarn Swift. So I'm going to give it enough clearance for me to clamp this on my ironing board. You do not need to use an ironing board. You can use any surface in your house that you are comfortable clamping your Swift onto, whether that's your coffee table or your dining room table or whatever it is that works for you. You're going to make that opening. It's wide enough to be clamped on, so now I'm just going to spin it to tighten that clamp so it is secured. In doing that, you've basically clamped the Swift onto whatever surface you're going with. So it's basically biting onto the edge. Sometimes these do mark up your tables, so keep that in mind. Maybe don't attach it to something that you want to, avoid scratching just in case. And now what I do next is I open my umbrella portion of the Swift about halfway. This is just what I do. So you can play around and decide and figure out what your preference is. Then I take my skein that I have untwisted and I drape it over all of the prongs of my umbrella. So you want to make sure that your skein is on the outer edge all the way around. You don't want any part of your yarn to be on the inside of these crisscrosses. On mine, they're green. So you can keep an eye on these outer crisscrosses, make sure that the yarn is on the outside. Now that I have it around, you can see that if I let go of this skein, it would be a disaster. So what I need to do is stretch out the umbrella so that everything is secure. So I'm just going to extend the umbrella up. For this skein, it's stretched out all the way it can go, and you can see that it is on the Swift. Now, as the Swift is turning, it is going to assist you in that. It's not a static thing. If it's spinning around and you're starting to be afraid, don't be afraid. It's exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Now, the second thing that is really helpful to have for this is a yarn winder. And this is basically a cylinder with a crank and a yarn feeder. And similarly to the yarn Swift, there is a little foot at the bottom of the yarn winder, and that is what clamps onto your surface. So I'm going to clamp this onto the edge of my ironing board. And again, you don't have to use an ironing board. You can use whatever works for you that you have in your house, whether that's a table, a shelf, whatever. All right, so now I have my Swift and my winder, and both are secure on the ironing board. This one could actually be a little bit more. Okay, now we're ready to do the next step. You are going to need some scissors for this. So I'm coming in with voiceover because the audio of this clip wasn't good. I'm trying to figure out a mic and I am having trouble. Anyway, so around the circumference of your hank, there are going to be several yarn ties. You can see one on the front here. And the amount of yarn ties that each hank has will vary depending on where you're getting your skeins from, but you need to snip those around the whole circumference before you can start winding. You're basically just going to go around and snip off those yarn ties one by one and slowly slide them off your skein. Here's a close-up shot to give you a better idea of what those yarn ties will look like. Sometimes they will look differently than the main yarn of your skein, and sometimes they will be exactly the same as your skein, so you really need to look carefully. Typically, you'll be able to catch them by looking for the strands of yarn that are running vertically, whereas you see most of the skein is running horizontally. So you look for those vertical strands and snip them. It's important that you catch all of the yarn ties and snip them, because if you miss one and you start winding, it's going to create a problem for your winding process and potentially lead to tangles. So after you've caught them all, you'll notice that one of the yarn ties was actually the two ends of the skein tied together in a knot. So once you've snipped them all and you've found that join, you can use one of those strands to begin winding. All right, I'm going one time back around. I think I got them all. And I'm going to just make a pile of them to save. I'm saving up scraps to take to Hedgehog Fibers in Ireland to cash in on a discount with their Recycle with Tweety program. So this will go into that pile. Now that I have my loose end that isn't connected to the circle, I'm going to weave that through my yarn feeder, and then I'm going to put it in this little notch in my yarn winder. Now that it's secure, I like to hold tension by putting the yarn over my fingers, and you're just going to start winding. I think it's important and helpful to go slowly at first, just because, as you can see here, there are some twists in this skein, just how it's oriented on the Swift. So there are some spots where it's winding really smoothly and others where it kind of catches. So I'm just starting out slowly. Also, I want to note, you can see in this shot that this Swift is slanted. I think that's just the nature of it being clipped to an ironing board where there's a lip on what I've clamped it to. But this isn't necessarily normal, so if you're setting yours up and you're like, oh, mine is not slanted like Rachel's, I must be doing it wrong. You're not. I'm just, it's just very makeshift over here. So keep going, and not like here there's a snag. So I'm just going slowly to make sure I'm dealing with any potential roadblocks as I come to them. And then once you've kind of smoothed those out, and you can see that you're working with a pretty smooth sailing situation, you can just keep winding. Something that I think is also important to note is that your winding time is going to change based on your yarn weight. So this is a DK weight and it goes relatively quickly. If you're winding a fingering weight skein, it will take longer because it has typically double the yardage and the yarn is much thinner. So your wind time will vary based on the weight of your skeins. So just keep that in mind, something good to know. All right, so now I have come to the end of winding this skein, and I've just taken it from hank form, and now it is in what we call cake form. So this is a yarn cake. And here's a tip if you want to save your labels to remember what yarn you're working with. I'm just gonna fold this in half and, maybe again, so it's just kind of folded in on itself. It's a tiny version of itself now. I'm going to hold it on top of the center of my new yarn cake as I slide it off, and that way it's going to envelop the label into its pretty little cake form. And now this is totally ready to use. You can either start knitting or crocheting with it by using the end of the yarn that is on the outside of your cake, or you can dig into the center and use the center pole. That's my preference. Apparently it's very polarizing which one you choose, but just use the one that works for you and you should be good to go. So now let me take this down and I'll show you the other Swift option that you can use. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to wind using a tabletop Swift. And the concept is still much the same, except instead of clamping your Swift onto the edge of your table or shelf or whatever surface you're going with, you're simply going to have your Swift sit on top of your surface, and I'll show you how that works right now. All right, I had to go around the room to find all of the pieces. That is potentially one drawback of a tabletop Swift, at least the kind that I have, and that drawback is there are all these different pieces. So I guess I should talk to you about what they are before I set it up. Basically, there are two wooden pieces that slide together to form a base. Okay? And then you have these other two wooden pieces with notches that are used to lay them on top of one another to make an X. You line that up with the base, you put a dowel in to secure it, and on these top wood pieces, you'll notice that there are several different hole options, and they are labeled with the inch circumference, so you can choose between 30 inch, 38 inch, 46 inch, 54 inch, 63 inch, and 72 inch. So since I'm going to be winding a hank of DK, I'm going to try the 54 inch, which is the fourth notch out, and we'll just see how that works. So you can see that similar to the umbrella Swift, this is also going to spin, and that is going to help you wind. So let's go ahead and wind another skein of Rory. So I'm going to untwist this, and I'm keeping my thumb in the middle of this loop just so I am not creating a tangle. And I'm draping it over the 4 dowels set up on the table Swift. Now, this is way too loose. I know that if I start winding this, I'm going to have tangles, and it needs to be a bit more taut. So I'm going to move every single dowel 1 notch outward and see how that goes. And I'm still not really happy with how loose this is, so I'm going to go 1 more notch and see if I can get all 4 notches to the outermost option. And I can, and I'm happy with that. That's really nice and taut, so that should be good. Okay, so I took my yarn winder off when I was getting it set up again, but I'm just going to put this back on here, and I'm going to cut these yarn ties. Now, one of your yarn ties will actually be the 2 ends of your skein tied together in a knot. So when you get to that particular yarn tie, I like to get the end of the yarn that is sticking out more. The other end is in here, but I know that if I grab this end to start winding, since this is so loose, it could create a tangle. So I'm just going to use the end of the yarn that's already more exposed. I'm going to thread it through my winder, and now I can repeat the process and start slowly to make sure it's not in a twisted orientation. Make sure I just go slowly to get it started. And once it starts being smooth sailing, I can go a little faster. When you hit a snag like I just did, don't try and power through. Stop your winding and investigate what's going on. That will save your future self the potential of a lot of heartache, because you don't want to be creating tangles where they don't need to exist. Just a quick note, if a Swift is not on your immediate to buy list, there are ways for you to wind your hanks into workable yarn forms without a Swift. It just takes a lot longer and has potential for more tangles. So the Swift is easier, but it's not impossible to wind a hank without it. One thing you want to keep an eye on with a tabletop Swift, or a Swift that isn't utilizing like the notch of a V shape, these dowels are just straight. So like you can see here, sometimes the yarn is going to whoop. Anyway, sometimes the yarn is going to ride up and you don't want it to fly off the dowels, or your dowel might pop off, but that's a quick fix if you stop right away to address that problem. Also, I want to say that when these things happen in your making process, whether that's in the time you're actually knitting or in the prep time where you're getting your yarn ready to go, mistakes are going to happen. Hiccups in the process are going to happen, and you just need to learn to roll with them. I know it doesn't sound fun, but nothing is going to be perfect all the time. So the sooner we learn to live with that, I think the happier we'll be. Also, I think it's important to know and to keep in mind that not only will things go wrong, but it is totally normal to struggle or have a learning curve when you are doing something for the first time or when you're new at something. So if you hit roadblocks with your winding, don't get discouraged and give up. Just keep practicing. You will find your groove and what your preferences are and what works for you. Okay, so that shows you how to use these two different types of Swifts. Again, this is an umbrella style Swift, and this is a tabletop style Swift. I have issues with both of them. Neither of them are my dream Swift, so I will link these actual products in the video description box, but I'll also link the two different selections I would make of these different kinds if I were purchasing them knowing what I know now. I didn't know what I didn't like about them before I purchased them. What I like about this green umbrella Swift is that it is affordable and I'm not afraid of damaging it. It's very, hardy while also being kind of flimsy. So enjoy figuring that paradox out. But I've had it for years. It's kind of annoying. Sometimes the yarn gets tangled. Like for instance, these metal latches, sometimes the yarn gets caught in them. I don't think that would be a problem necessarily with a wooden umbrella Swift. I'm not sure. But this would be a great travel Swift maybe. If you are not afraid of it being damaged or if it gets lost, it's not a big deal. But one thing that I do like about it is how convenient it is. As long as I have a surface that it can clamp onto, it's going to get the job done. Now for this tabletop Swift, this is the first time that I have used it on a fabric lined surface. Usually I use it on a table or, something with a smooth surface, and I always have problems with it. It slides around and sometimes it falls completely off the table. And then if it falls, there are all these pieces that come apart and scatter, into the nothingness. And you have to go crawl around on your hands and knees to find where every single piece went. And that is a pain in the butt. I would like to spend my time doing other things than chasing after missing pieces to a yarn Swift. So this is not my favorite. If I had to choose between one or the other, I would probably use my green one more often than my wooden one. I just use my wooden one because it's usually already set up, or at least the pieces are, you know, somewhere set up, somewhere on the floor, whereas this I keep put away. And so anyway, usually, even though this is inherently less convenient, it's somehow more convenient. So yes, paradoxes all around. But those are the kind of pros and cons to using these two different style Swifts, in my opinion. Again, always do what works for you. You may find that you love this tabletop Swift and the reasons that I'm bothered by them don't affect you. Who knows? So do what works for you. Figure out what you want to do. I will say this yarn winder I have had since 2008. I have seen people complain about this specific winder and how it has broken and failed them. Mine is still going strong. Hopefully it continues to do so. But 15 years is a pretty good track record, I think, and I'll continue to use this. It's the only yarn winder I've ever owned, and it does the job. It gets the job done for me. So I hope this was helpful to you, whether you are my mom watching this or another beginning knitter. I hope that you learned something. If you have questions or you want me to clarify anything, just let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to do so. But in the meantime, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and if you want to be notified of my next upload, all you have to do is click that notification bell. And last but not least, head over to Instagram and follow me at Rachel is Knitting if you don't already. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.